Top Girls is an exploration of what it means to carve out a life within a patriarchal society. The dreamlike opening scene in which Marlene, a successful London businesswoman celebrating a recent promotion, hosts a dinner party whose guests include women from the Europe of the Middle Ages, 19th century England, and 13th century Japan, as well as women who are the subjects of famous paintings and stories composed by men, shows how patriarchy has affected and often ruined the lives of women throughout history. Carol Churchill argues that patriarchal rule is so deeply ingrained that it is difficult to imagine a life without it. Even in 20th century London, in showing the insidious ways in which patriarchy controls women's lives, Churchill suggests that women will never be truly liberated until they are freed from the confines of patriarchal society. The women in the dinner party scene share their experiences of lives lived in service of men, and their stories demonstrate the negative effects of such an existence. Lady Nijo, a concubine turned Buddhist nun who lived in 13th century Japan, knew from childhood that she was being raised for the emperor's service. Though the other women are horrified by how Nijo was treated in life, given to the emperor willingly by her father, subjected to physical and psychological abuse during her years at court, and eventually cast out with nowhere to go and nothing to do but become a nun. Nijo herself admits to having been brainwashed by her circumstances. She was conditioned to adhere to the whims of the men in her life and saw no hope of escaping the bonds of patriarchy. Patient Griselda, a figure in a story from the Canterbury Tales, marries a man who wants to test her obedience to him. To do so, he takes away both of her children, presumably to have them killed, and then, after nearly 2 decades of marriage, divorces Griselda and sends her back to her parents' peasant cottage. He shows up some time later to retrieve her, their now nearly grown children, at his side and congratulates her on passing his test of obedience. Pope Joan, a woman who, according to legend, passed herself off as a man in order to rule as Pope in the Middle Ages, tells of how, after years of living as a man and enjoying the power afforded to her as a result, she had essentially forgotten she was a woman at all. When she became pregnant, she didn't know what was happening. She admits to not having spoken to another woman since the age of 12. Joan wound up giving birth on the side of the road in the middle of a procession and was then stoned to death by her cardinals for her deception. From Nijo, who was raised from birth to be a man's plaything, to Griselda, who suffocated her own needs in order to prove her obedience to her husband, to Joan, who willingly repressed her own in order to enjoy the privileges reserved for men. These women's stories demonstrate the claustrophobia of the patriarchy. Marlene could easily disregard their stories as irrelevant to her own experience. Surely, as a modern businesswoman, Marlene would never be put in the positions these women have been forced to occupy. Marlene initially feels that due to her recent success, she is exempt from the confines of the patriarchy. But hearing stories like Nijo's, Joan's, and Griselda's over the course of the first act allows her to see how patriarchy is still very much a force in her own life. When Marlene returns to work at the Top Girls Employment Agency, she does not appear rattled by the events of the dinner party, but she soon learns that she is not exempt from the effects of the patriarchy either. The wife of a man at her firm comes into Marlene's office to beg Marlene to forfeit a promotion so that the man, Howard Kidd, can have it. Mrs. Kidd says she has had to bear the brunt of Howard's having been passed over. She has dedicated her life, she says, to putting him first every inch of the way and does not want to see him passed over so that a woman can attain more power at the firm. Mrs. Kidd's entreaty reveals a complicated psychology at work. Mrs. Kidd, whose life has been in service to her husband, feels that she should at least be able to reap the rewards of the success she has tried so hard to facilitate for him. In realizing that all her hard work and sacrifice has not paid off, she feels that she herself has failed. Rather than admit that her deference to patriarchal values has sidelined her life, she chooses to believe that other women's success is the true enemy. When Marlene refuses to give up the job, Mrs. Kidd berates her being for a ball breaker and holding an unnatural position in society. Mrs. Kidd has all clearly internalized this language and the thought processes behind it as a result of her belief that going with the flow of patriarchy rather than rising up against it would allow her to live the most comfortable life. In this scene, Churchill demonstrates how Marlene herself is not immune to the willful complicity in the patriarchy she saw on display at her dinner party. Though she is separated in time from the other women, she is still much content with the struggles they faced. And as she realizes this, she feels that even succeeding in a man's world is not enough to liberate her from the constraints of patriarchy. The mirrored tales Churchill presents in the play's opening scene demonstrate how mind numbing and mind warping a life lived under the patriarchy can be. As Marlene brings the knowledge she has gleaned from this dreamlike assembly back into the real world, she finds that for all her success, she has been playing a losing game all along. Though Marlene never fully reckons with the fact that a triumph in the corporate world cannot erase the fact of her womanhood, or the fact she lives in a fundamentally patriarchal world, Churchill displays the insidious creeping feeling of dread, fear, and insufficiency that such an existence creates, and argues that moving successfully within the patriarchy does not mean one has escaped its confines. The full range of women's stories is on display in Top Girls as the play moves from the metaphysical world of power hungry businesswoman Marlene's fantasies to her fast paced corporate London life. Churchill uses the play's opening dinner party sequence to demonstrate the range, vitality, and necessity of women's stories. As she showcases women's stories, both fictional and non fictional, Churchill argues that in a world controlled by patriarchy, sharing stories is perhaps the greatest currency women have. As Marlene's guests, real and fictional, share the tales of their lives and bond over their shared pain. Churchill highlights the eerie coincidences between them, suggesting that the only way for women to thrive in such a cruel world is to draw strength and wisdom from one another's stories. Two of the stories Churchill focuses on in the dinner party scene are non-fiction. They are taken from women's own accounts of their lives. Churchill's choice to portray real life women from history grants them the chance to impart the wisdom they have gained through their trials and tribulations. Isabella Bird, a real life explorer, writer, and naturalist, and the first woman to be elected Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, is the first real guest at Marley's dinner party. Isabella is an anomaly in the play. She is the only woman who was never a mother, the only woman whose work was honored in her lifetime, and the only woman whose actual writing is used to inform her dialogue in the play. In including Isabella, Churchill shows how vital the validation of women's stories truly is. Because Isabella was able to be seen and heard in her lifetime, she was able to be free in ways that many of the other guests did not. Lady Nijo was a concubine turned Buddhist nun who believed who lived in 13th century Japan. A life of sexual servitude to the emperor is what she was brought up for from a baby. And for a long time, this was the only course she ever believed her life would take. She reveals that later, when she eventually fell out of favor at court, she had nothing except her dead father's one time advice to her, which was to join a convent if she found herself rejected by the emperor. Despite her suffering, Nijo's writings lasted through the ages. Churchill includes Nijo as a testament to women's stories and their inherent worth, even though often they are marked by pain and suffering, which many would rather look away from. The rest of the guest stories are fictional. The backstories are either drawn from legend or created by Churchill herself. Through her use of fictional characters alongside non fictional ones, Churchill argues that the stories of women who have been flattened through one dimensional portrayals, often at the hands of male artists and creators, are just as necessary as those which are real. Pope Joan disguised herself as a man and ascended to the papacy in the Middle Ages. Though she reigned for only a couple of years, as she tells the story of her life to the other party guests, she reflects on how deep into the role she got. She nearly forgot that she was a woman and did not realize that she had become pregnant until she went into labor in the middle of a religious procession. Joan gave birth in the street. Her cardinals declared her the Antichrist before dragging her away and stoning her and her child to death. If it hadn't been for the baby, she laments, she might have ruled for her old into her old age. Joan, like Marlene, pursues success and power at all costs. Patient Griselda is a figure in European folklore. She most famously appears in stories by Boccaccio and Chaucer, who were, of course, both men. In allowing patient Griselda the space to relay her story of having had her obedience tested in cruel ways by her wealthy husband, Churchill allows Griselda to have the abuse she suffered at the hands of her husband and other men be validated by other women. Dulgret, who appears in a painting by Flemish Renaissance artist Peter Bruegel the Elder, is like Griselda, a subject of folklore. In the painting, she is shown leading an army of women to pillage hell. Grit is a term used at the time to describe shrewish or cranky women. A Flemish proverb that states she could plunder in front of hell and return unscathed would have been known to the painting viewers, and thus Grit would have been seen as a cartoonish rendering of a woman who'd shirked her place. In the play, Churchill allows Gret a moment of redemption and agency, similar to Griselda's, giving her the chance to relay things from her point of view and explain the anger and frustration that drove her mission. Marlene's story is also fictional, but Churchill allows it for different purposes than the other fictional women in the play. Marlene is depicted as a cold, self absorbed businesswoman who is primarily interested in her own professional advancement. She abandoned her daughter Angie to her sister Joyce's care when the girl was still an infant and has climbed tirelessly to a position of power at the top girls' employment agency. Churchill uses Marlene as an indictment of Thatcherism, prizing of the individual's needs over the collective ones of society. In this sense, Marlene is being used by Churchill in the same way Gret and Griselda were used by the men who told their stories for them. Marlene is, at the end of the day, a plaything of Churchill's, but her narrative serves a clear purpose and is used in service of asking important questions, and thus it has just as much worth as any real women's stories. The interplay between the real and the unreal within Top Girls is meant to call into question how women's stories have been erased through the ages and to argue that every woman's story has worth and value. Churchill's use of women's stories, fictional and non fictional, in exploring what contemporary feminism looks like demonstrates her faith in the universal truth of women's stories. The character at the center of Top Girls is Marlene, a successful businesswoman whose hunger for power forms the framework of the play's action. As the drama unfolds, the audience begins to realize bit by bit just how much Marlene has sacrificed for her career. Set in the 1980s, just a few years after the controversial Margaret Thatcher had come to power as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdoms, who famously said there was no such thing as society, only individual men and women who needed to look to themselves first rather than rely on the government for aid. Top Girls reckons with the way that Thatcherism pits the individual against larger society. Through Marlene, Churchill examines what it means to have power and success, and what it means to devote one's whole life to getting them, ultimately suggesting that pursuit of shallow ideas of success rooted in financial or socio-political gain alone will always lead to disappointment. Churchill uses Marlene's arc to call into question what success actually looks like. Marlene appears to be a successful woman. She is financially independent, powerful within her chosen profession, and free of any burdensome attachments that might hold her back from pursuing even loftier goals. And yet, she has failed in many fundamental ways. Marlene's success at her cutthroat employment agency, itself named Top Girls, an infantilizing name, which implies that even if women make it to the top of the social or financial ladder, they are still just girls, has allowed Marlene to act as if she is above other people. She is condescending to the women she interviews for job placements, speaks cruelly to of her niece Angie, who is actually her biological daughter, and looks down upon her sister Joyce, who has remained in the working class neighborhood Marlene herself once called home. Marlene is cruel to others, forgetting always that she herself has been a victim of cruelty, namely the cruel power structures which keep her from ever truly becoming a top girl, and which have warped her mind, causing her to believe that financial success and social capitals are the only roads to fulfillment. Marlene is an aloof character who rarely displays emotion or states her motivations outright. This trait itself can be seen as a casualty of a devotion to obtaining power and success at any cost. She has learned how to play the games that will allow her to climb the corporate ladder, and as a result, she has sacrificed empathy, intuition, and investment in the lives of others, all stereotypically feminine traits which in the male oriented world of business could have held her back from achieving the success she's won at the start of the play. She believes that success has required her to sacrifice empathy and softness, and in this way, she has failed to see how basic human goodness does not make one weak. Marlene's failure as a mother is explored most deeply in the play's final scene, which depicts a visit Marlene paid to her sister Joyce and her niece, who is really her daughter, Angie. During the visit, Marlene and Joyce get into a vicious fight over Angie. Marlene defends her choice to give up Angie, claiming that since Joyce wanted a baby and Marlene wanted out of their working class hometown, and the arrangement made perfect sense. The sisters' agreement, though only benefited Marlene from the burden of motherhood, Marlene was free to pursue success, power, and independence, while Joyce lingered in a loveless marriage, suffered a miscarriage of her own, and became the primary caregiver for her and Marlene's ailing parents. As the scene progresses, Joyce's misery calls into question whether Marlene's life is really a success at all. She has risen to power on the shoulders of other people and has then alienated herself from those who helped her in the beginning. In this way, Marlene's life is a success on paper, but is actually a failure in other, perhaps greater ways. Churchill is clearly in opposition to the effects of Thatcherism and pursuit of individual success at the expense of decency, goodness, and support of others, in creating a character who is so focused on her own success that she has become blind to the suffering not only of others but of herself as well. Churchill uses Marlene to show how what some people see as success is actually, in a very real way, abject failure. Top Girls features many different types of mothers, but Marlene is one of the only characters who sees motherhood as an insufferable burden. The journey to and through motherhood that Churchill explores are vastly different, and yet the story of Marlene, who asked her sister Joyce to raise her daughter Angie for her so that she could pursue a career, especially suggests that in a world shaped by patriarchy, motherhood is most often framed as a burden that only holds women back. The women in the play have been so traumatized by the patriarchal society that they are disconnected from motherhood as a joy or a privilege. As a result, their complicated relationships to motherhood often result in them shirking their roles as mothers or avoiding those roles altogether, often at a painful cost. In the middle of the play, the audience is introduced to Angie, a strange, hateful 16-year-old who has come to realize that her Aunt Marlene is truly her mother, and now expresses a desire to kill the woman who has raised her from birth, her adoptive mother, Joyce. Angie's palpable sense of rejection and otherworldly intuition is thrust up against Marlene's desire to forget or ignore her role in Angie's life. Marlene's secret role as a mother informs some of the play's most dramatic moments and cements Churchill's argument that even modern women who are told they can have it all see motherhood as a burden best avoided. In Angie's first scene, she complains to her friend Kit about how greatly she dislikes her mother Joyce, but also reveals that she knows that Joyce is not her true mother. Her auntie Marlene is. Angie expresses her desire to kill her mother, but it is unclear which mother she wants to dispatch. In the second act, Angie travels to London on her own to visit Marlene, whom she hasn't seen in over a year. When Marlene shares the news that she's just been promoted within her office at the top girls' employment agencies, Angie reveals that she knew Marlene would be in charge of everything. When Marlene protests that she is not yet in charge of everything, Angie predicts that one day she will be. Marlene offers Angie a place to stay, but when Angie picks up on Marlene's hesitation to shelter her indefinitely, Angie asks Marlene if she wants her. The day they spent together last year, Angie says, was the best day of Angie's whole life. This scene shows Angie, who, having figured out the truth of her parentage, feels abandoned and unwanted, struggling to understand the choices her true mother has made. On the one hand, she seems to admire Marlene and has hopes that Marlene will continue to advance in the world she's chosen to devote herself to. On the other hand, Angie clearly has concerns about being wanted by Marlene and wants to get her aunt to profess love and devotion to her. When Marlene is called away to take care of some work, Angie says that rather than going out sightseeing around London, she'd prefer to stay in the office. It is where she most wants to be in the world. Though the office is boring, according to Marlene, it is the only place Angie wants to be. This could be due to a combination of Angie's desire to emulate her biological mother and familiarize herself with the corporate world, or simply her need to be in proximity to Marlene, asserting her right to be recognized as Marlene's own daughter. After Angie falls asleep in the office, Marlene talks with her co-workers, Nell and Win, about the sleeping girl. Win tells Marlene that Angie has confessed she wants to work at Top Girls one day. But Marlene thinks Angie could only ever work a low-level job, such as packing groceries in a store. Marlene darkly depicts that Angie is not going to make it. Marlene is assessing Angie not as a child, not even as her child, but in terms of how viable her corporate success is. Marlene, like Pope Joan from the dinner party, has distanced herself from the traditional responsibilities of femininity and motherhood, empathy, care, and devotion, and can now only see motherhood and all the duties accompanying it as a burden. In the play's final scene, Angie has summoned Marlene home without Joyce's knowledge or permission. Angie is delighted to see Marlene, whom she loves and misses, but Joyce is less than happy to see her sister. After Angie leaves the room, the two women begin fighting over the arrangement that has so deeply impacted each of their lives. The fact that Marlene, who wanted no part of motherhood as she felt it would bind her to an unremarkable working class life, had Joyce raised Angie as her own. Marlene can't understand how her sister has allowed herself to remain trapped in a poor town and a loveless marriage, while Joyce sees Marlene's desire for upward mobility as selfish and disgusting. As their class issues come to a head, it becomes apparent that the crux of their disagreement stems from their attitudes towards motherhood. When Joyce laments having had a miscarriage, Marlene practically brags about the two abortions she has had in the years since moving to London. Marlene says sees any pain over lost children as boring. This is no doubt a casualty of her desire of power and success at any cost, and the internalized misogyny that is the result of years spent attempting to navigate and succeed in a male dominated world, a world in which motherhood was only ever presented as a hindrance to real success. Churchill's argument that motherhood within a patriarchal world can only ever be a burden is a bleak one, and yet she does not shy away from using her characters to demonstrate just how cruelly the world has historically treated mothers. Angie's desire for vengeance against the two mothers who have seen her in their own ways as a burden is symbolic of Churchill's own despair over the fact that, in light of Thatcherism and patriarchal values, motherhood is often seen as something contemptible and burdensome rather than an expression of strength, devotion, and care.